Welcome, everyone, to Beyond the Crucible, the podcast that dares to talk about setback and failure, but not so we can commiserate. It's all so that we can elevate. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show, and our mission today is to offer you the hope that your crucible experiences, those tragedies and challenges you faced or are facing right now, don't define you. They refine you. They did not happen to you. They happened for you. And no one I know, and trust me, I have searched my memory banks for the people I know. No one I know knows that better than the founder of Beyond the Crucible, the host of the show, and my friend Warwick Fairfax. Warwick, this is one of those episodes that we do that is based, it's just a dialogue between the two of us. And this one is based on a very, 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 I think, informative and helpful blog that you've written. So I'm looking forward to unpacking some of the points you made for our listeners today.
Well, thanks, Gary. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and this is something I feel very passionate about. So looking forward to the discussion.
It's always good, folks, when Warwick says he feels passionate about something. If you have listened to the show once, you've probably heard him say, if you listen to it more than once, you've heard him say it a lot. Find something that you're off the charts passionate about as you craft your vision. And Warwick certainly has done that with the things that we talk about here at Beyond the Crucible. And indeed, what we're going to talk about here today, you'll hear the passion in his voice. But you also get a chance, because this is based on the most recent blog at beyondthecrucible.com. You'll also get a chance to read his passion. That blog is now available. It is called "Think Your Vision is Too Small?" ? These 7 truths will change your mind. And that is our mission today, is to change your mind if you're thinking that your vision is too small. And we think by the end of the conversation, we will have succeeded. At least that is our hope. So that blog, as I said, is available at beyondthecrucible.com right now. And Warwick, the obvious question to ask you is, what prompted you to write a blog to encourage people who think their vision is too small to recognize that maybe it's not too small? In fact, it very likely isn't too small. In fact, it almost certainly isn't too small. What led you to do that? How are you someone who, and listeners probably know this, but how has this played out in your own life, and what led you to share what you've learned with folks who read the blog?
Yeah, Gary. I mean, we'll talk here in a bit about my own circumstance, but sometimes after a devastating crucible, this gut-wrenching that fundamentally alters the course of our life, we find it challenging to find a way forward. For many of us, we go through a devastating crucible that fundamentally alters the course of our lives. It's just incredibly painful. And we struggle to find a way forward. We struggle to find a meaning and purpose. And even if we do find a vision, we're in such a negative headspace, negative soul space, there is a tendency to think, that vision is it's too small. And we'll get into some points here later, but there are others that have bigger visions. What difference is it really going to make? It's a pinprick of difference in my community, my state, my country, let alone the world. It's just why bother? I mean, I'm messed up and the world's messed up, and you get in this cynical, almost doom loop in which you just think it's all too hard. And, even if I tried, I'm kind of messed up and I won't make a difference. And even if I wasn't messed up, it's just anything I do is going to be very small, and it's not really going to impact that many people. And there are others who can do it better. And you just get in this sense of it's all too hard. Why bother? Why try? And you just get discouraged before you even start.
Yeah. And that is something, Warwick, this isn't, and listeners who've been with us a while know this, that's not something that just academically, theoretically from other guests on the show. You don't know that all from what's been told you, or what you've read. You know that from your own experience, right? So talk a little bit about how this blog was informed by your own crucible and your own journey moving beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely can relate to the thought that my vision is not big enough and it won't make much difference. And yeah, I was in a tough situation in terms of thinking that my vision is too small because, as listeners would know, I grew up in a 150-year-old family media business in Australia, newspapers, TV, magazines. We had the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age in Melbourne, the Australian Financial Review. It was the Australian equivalent of the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Large opinion leaders. So, after I launched my $2.25 billion takeover in 1987, my dad died earlier that year, bring it back to the ideals of the founder and see the company as being well managed. 3 years later, after numerous refinancings, Australia got in a big recession and the company went bankrupt. So, and obviously passed from family hands. So my vision was, as I said, to restore the company and the image of the founder and see it be well run. And I directly contributed to, the company falling out of family hands. So at that point, I felt like anything I do will be microscopic in impact compared to the impact I could have had with this family media company, John Fairfax Limited. It was soul crushing and depressing just thinking, well, I'm like 30 and I've missed my chance to have an impact because I'm very altruistic by nature. I've missed my chance to have an impact for good in the world. And anything I do will be so infinitesimally small as it's irrelevant and it won't make a difference. That was soul crushing, the fact that I had my shot to make the world a better place. And at age 30, I blew it. And that was it. I had my shot and I blew my shot and that's it. There was never going to be a call back to the team. There was never going to be a call back to have an impact in the world. I was done. My career in the sense of having an impact in the world for good. Whatever else I did, it was over. I lost my shot. It was gone. For somebody who's altruistic like me, that was just absolutely soul-crushing. It was devastating.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I haven't thought about it this way until you've just talked about what you've talked about. I've thought all the time since we first started working together that losing $2.25 billion is a big number. That, as you've said many times, it's a group of one, right? When you get right down to it. But I never thought about it that the same sort of outsized setback failure crucible was in vision as well. It wasn't just in bottom line, right? I mean, $2.25 billion is a big number, but the impact that John Fairfax Limited had and the impact you could have had leading that was big too. And you said many times the money wasn't the worst part of it. I would think that losing that vision was right up there with the worst parts of what that felt like when the takeover failed.
Yeah, there's no question, Gary. I mean, this was, I guess you could say, an inherited vision when you think of the founder of the company, my great-great-grandfather, John Fairfax, his son, Sir James Redding Fairfax, then his son in turn, my grandfather, Sir James Oswald, my father, Sir Warwick Fairfax. These were great people, great men who were highly respected, who had an influence on the nation. There was generations of people who basically just had this sense of service, the sense of we're here not because of the money, we're here to serve our nation. Some people have generations, a family in the military who, served, our nation. So this was, a little bit similar in some ways, but, it's on a massive scale. So, obviously I wasn't knighted, we don't do that in Australia anymore and didn't really do anything deserving, but these were people that were recognized for their service to the community, their service to the country. That's basically, at least in theory, how you get knighted. So there was a legacy of generations of having a big vision and a big impact on the nation, and that ended.
Right.
Generations of having a big impact on our country with the big vision that ended with me. So that, yeah, it was absolutely, it was crushing. It's like, okay, I guess Warwick's kind of let down the, 150 years of vision and let down the legacy, and it will be no more. And so yes, exactly. It was very devastating.
Well, here's the good news for you and for listeners, that that was not the end of your vision. That was not the end of your vision leaving a legacy, and your vision changing the lives of people. Let me ask you this question. It's in the blog. You propose in the blog, there are 7 points of how we move forward in finding vision and living it out. But what prompted you to put the thoughts that you've built up over the years into this blog? Before we dive into those thoughts, what's sort of the overarching thing that you hope people get out of this? And then we'll go point by point to help them get it.
Yeah, I think for me is, as I mentioned, just the thought that I let down the whole family, nation. I could have had this big influence. And you tend to think that a big vision has to be save the world, provide clean drinking water to every person in Africa. I mean, end child, trafficking. I mean, there's a lot of terrible things in the world, and thinking, unless I'm making some mega difference at a global level, it's just, you can look at other people, read the news, watch documentaries on TV, and it's just like, gosh, it makes you feel so small and insignificant and almost embarrassed. And so I guess with these points and these thoughts, I wanted people to realize that, no vision is too small. Basically, if it's on your heart, and you feel like it's making a difference, even if it's at a small level from your perspective, it's enough.
So let's roll into the blog itself and start going through these points. And the first one you've already kind of hit on a little bit, and that's the idea that, and it was something that you really had to accept early on as you tried to rebuild a vision for your life. It's not a competition. If it was a competition, you're comparing yourself to your great-great-grandfather going, well, good night. I mean, that's the perspective. So your first point here for folks is it's not a competition. Unpack that for us.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the first point is not a competition. That thought can do tremendous damage because you look at, in my case, my great-great-grandfather, or any of my ancestors, great-great-grandfather, great-grandfather, grandfather, father, they all
those knights, all those sirs.
Exactly. Right? Oh my gosh. It was just like, the NFL Hall of Fame kind of thing. It'd be like, being the kid of an NFL, 3 generations of NFL players, all of whom were all in the Hall of Fame, which you've heard from an earlier guest has actually never happened. There's never been even a father and son, let alone 3 generations.
Right.
So yeah, it's so easy to say, oh, let's give up because, I'll never be in the NFL, let alone the Hall of Fame. But it's a similar thought. So it's not a competition against your ancestors. Some of us have, parents, grandparents that did achieve a lot and maybe did do a lot of good in some ways. But it's also not a competition in terms of people that you read about in the news or in documentaries. Admire the things that others have done. Appreciate it. But it's not a competition. It's more, about the vision that, a vision that you have. Sometimes what can be worse is a vision of friends that we knew. Maybe they grew up in the same neighborhood and same school, and they making a massive difference. And it's like, hey, they grew up like I did. Look what they're doing, and I'm not. That's almost the worst case scenario when it's people who are close to you rather than just people on the news. So that's really the first fundamental point: is it's not a competition. Everybody's vision is different, and you just can't view it like that. I think the other interesting thing is, for most people that have a big vision, by and large, you'd like to think at least some of them are altruistic. They're doing it for the right reasons.
Right.
And so I very much doubt if they met you, and let's say it's a friend of yours, they would say, well, I'm helping to bring clean drinking water to kids in Africa, and you're helping to clean up a park in the inner city in the local neighborhood, they're not going to say, that's pathetic. Boy, I mean, really? You're doing nothing. You know what they're probably going to say? You know what? That's great. It's not a competition. I'm reminded in another context of David Charbonnet, who was a Navy SEAL that was injured in a parachuting training accident in Southern California. When I was embarrassed about what I went through, my crucible compared to his because he was paralyzed, he said, you know what, Warwick, your worst day is your worst day. It's not a competition. I think there's a similar thought here. You know, your vision is your vision. It's not a competition. The David Charbonnets of this world, the people who are good people, they're going to say that, even if objectively we think their vision is 1,000 times bigger than ours. They're going to say, you know, Warwick, Gary, no, it's your vision is enough. You're passionate about it. It's making a difference. It's enough. And that, I think, should help us in some ways. You know, if they think so, then who are we to argue? So, yeah, that's really the first point, is it's not a competition.
Yeah, and I did some research this morning, just went looking around for quotes that align with some of these. And the one that aligns, I thought, well with this idea that it's not a competition is from Harriet Tubman. And Harriet Tubman said this: every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach the stars and change the world. Don't get bogged down in that comparison game, as you've just discussed. You have within you, regardless of what that vision is, if it's dedicated to serving others, you can change the world with it, which I think is a pivotal truth for sure. Second point in the blog, available at beyondthecrucible.com, is the key to establishing this vision is what's on your heart. Talk about that a little bit.
I mean, that really is foundational. It is, vision has to come from within. Yes, it can be influenced by other things you see and people, family, friends, what you read about or see. But it's got to come from deep within. From my faith perspective, it's something that God puts on your heart. You just feel this desire, this deep inner conviction that, in one sense, this is what I was made to do. I've had gifting. I've had experiences, maybe sometimes incredibly painful experiences. But this has all led up to this point. This is what I was meant to do. And so when it comes from deep within your heart, you feel like it's a calling. I mean, how can it be wrong if your vision comes from deep within, from a higher purpose, from God, whatever your spiritual framework is, and you used to have this deep, incredibly deep inner conviction that this was what you're meant to do, and it's just almost burning within your heart that I really do want to devote my life to this. That's not small. It can't be small. It can't be wrong in that sense. If it's deep within your heart and there's an altruistic purpose, and yes, it'd be a whole other blog and conversation, aligns with your faith and your values, and it aligns with your wiring and your gifting and all of that. And obviously you've got fellow travelers, friends who say, yeah, boy, this is so makes sense. It really is, it's absolutely feels like what you should be doing. I mean, there are ways we can test things to make sure it's not some delusional ego trip, but let's assuming it really is altruistic. It's in line with your passions and wiring and gifting, and fellow travelers think, yep, it's great. Let's make all those assumptions. Let's all enter that into evidence as a given, making all those assumptions. If it's something that's deep within your heart that you feel like this is what I was led to do, then to me, sounds simplistic. It's got to be right. And that's more than big enough if it's from deep within your heart. Right.
And as you talk about being deep within your heart, something that you're passionate about, you use the phrase off the charts, passionate all the time. I'm mindful that back when you were telling your story, the vision, though you were tied to it and you were enthusiastic about it, for the media company was, as you said here just a few minutes ago, it was an inherited vision, and those I would think your perspective is having gone through both, done that, and now you have your own vision that you're passionate about. The one that's perhaps more fulfilling to pursue, even though the footprint might be smaller, is what you're doing now at Beyond the Crucible, because that is what you're passionate about. It's not inherited. This was unearthed by you, not inherited from your family, right?
I think that's very true. I don't know that I realized it at the time.
Right.
I think I did use the words, it's burning a hole in my heart to, one letter I wrote to a family member. But it was more out of a sense of duty, obligation. It was just more, this needs to happen. I'm slated to be that person. I thought at least my parents did, my father did, to, be that next generation, the next mantle after all of these, Knights and John Fairfax. And but it was more the sense of, this is what I'm meant to do. Although I probably knew deep within, I wasn't sure I wanted to, or it was more out of obligation rather than,
right.
Boy, I'm looking forward to it. Like what I do now, it's more, I enjoy it, I look forward to it, I feel fulfilled, but I don't feel, and we'll talk about this later, I don't feel it's out of obligation. That was,
right.
It's a warning sign when you feel like this vision is something you've inherited and you have an obligation to do it. And whether you're enjoying it or not is irrelevant. Those are, if you have good fellow travelers, those should be warning signs that your fellow travelers say, hang on a second, is this really the vision that's on your heart or is it on somebody else's heart? So there is a distinction, which I didn't realize at the time, to be honest.
Well, life has a way of teaching us important lessons for sure. Third point in the blog, at beyondthecrucible.com right now. Blog is titled, Think Your Vision is Too Small? ? These 7 truths will change your mind. And we're walking through those truths on this episode. We're to truth number 3, and that is this, that we're going to have Warwick talk about a little bit. One life changed is enough. Talk about that a little bit for folks.
I'm passionate about a lot of things, and a lot of things in this discussion and blog and this podcast. But this concept of one life change is enough, it's almost like a mantra, like a touchstone that helps keep me grounded in this whole temptation to think. And if you believe in good versus evil, sort of the dark side, if you will, tempts us to think, oh, it's not enough, you're not good enough. Nothing you do will make a difference. There is a bit of this, I believe, people talk about spiritual warfare, but whatever your spiritual framework is, dark versus light, good versus evil. And there is that tendency, and one of the key ways to combat it, in addition to, it's obviously got to be what's on your heart from my faith perspective, that, God has put it on your heart. This sense that one life has changed enough, because then it's not a numbers game. I think listeners have heard me say this when my book came out in the fall of 2021, Crucible Leadership, Embrace Your Trials, Daily Life of Significance. I was almost literally on my knees praying. I said, Lord, whether it sells 1 copy, 1,000, 10,000, however many, that's irrelevant. I felt called to write it. The number, we do our best to market everything we do, whether it's the book, the podcast, what have you. But this sense that, if this book can help one person, that's enough. And that's true with the blog or this podcast that we're talking about today. One life changed is enough, More is great, but that's not really to limit our visions. It's to free us from the numbers game, the sense of obligation, the sense of, gosh, only sold 500 copies or 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever the number is. But others have sold, bestsellers that sell millions of copies. Well, I probably won't ever do that. You just start getting in this doom loop of negativity and frustration. It's an unwinnable game because usually, certainly in business, very few of us, the Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates of this world, it's like there's always somebody else who's better, quicker, smarter. Same is true in sports for the most part. When they talk about the GOAT, the greatest of all time, that means that everybody else is not the GOAT, right? There's only one GOAT.
Right.
So that means everybody else gets to feel bad about themselves because they're not Tom Brady,
Right.
or they're not, Roger Federer, or, Novak Djokovic in tennis, or, whoever you want to pick, Serena Williams. I mean, you go through people who are vying to be the GOAT. It's, it's like an impossible game. So the key is saying one life changed is enough. That's not limiting, but it's not about numbers. If I help one person, it's enough. It's a key concept, if you will.
Yeah, and I've seen that play out with you, Warwick, when you're at a speaking engagement and someone comes up and says how much your story has impacted them. Comments on the blog from guests that we've had about just that was really edifying. I never got that question before. Those kinds of things, I think, go to exactly what you speak. And the other thing that's interesting about One Life Changed is that it doesn't have to end there. And I say that because one of the other quotes that I found was from Amelia Earhart, who on this subject about one life changed is enough says this: a single act of kindness throws out roots in all directions, and the roots spring up and make new trees. And right from that little, that little one life changed, that person then can share it. And it's like the old shampoo commercials, those of us who are a certain age remember, and they told two friends and so on and so on and so on, right? You affect the people that you touch when you've been touched by something. And I think that is that's one of the reasons why One Life Changed is enough, is more than enough, right?
Absolutely. No, that is profoundly true. I think of, in Chicago, the Moody Bible Institute, D.L. Moody. From what I understand, he grew up in Boston, and he was sort of a young guy and not particularly wealthy. And somehow, from what I understand, there was a local shoemaker, I think it is, in Boston that befriended him and mentored him and, I think helped him in his spiritual journey. And I can't remember all the details, but nobody's ever heard of this, shoemaker in Boston. Right. And maybe the only life he ever helped was D.L. Moody, and most of us don't know who that person was. And he may never have seen the impact that Moody made. So, we're not always going to have a D.L. Moody that we get to mentor and help that, really helps a lot of people in the world. But the point is still valid is, we don't know that you have one person who helps another and helps another. And it's like a tree spreading out. That's a profound point. We don't always know that, but trust the fact that if you're helping people and doing good in the world, that it probably will spread. And even if it doesn't, it's all good, but it probably will. So that's a bonus, if you will. Yep.
All right. On to point 4 in this blog. And I've heard you say this. This is one of the founding and many of what of the things that we're talking about here, founding principles of Beyond the Crucible. But 4th point is this: link your vision to what you feel is important. Let me ask you this question. Why is that so important as you're crafting a vision?
Yeah, obviously the vision has got to be linked to, your beliefs, values, and your wiring, and that's all important. But you want to feel like that your vision is linked to something that you hold dear, that you think is really important. So for me, we talk a lot about, your worst day doesn't have to define you. You can bounce back from setbacks and failure, whether you caused it or others caused it. Well, that's very personal to me because I felt like my worst day, in a sense, was losing a 150-year-old family media business. Flying from Australia to the U.S. and trying to set a new life. But that was a pretty bad. There was some sense of relief, I suppose, but it was a pretty bad day, a very bad day, because look what I'd done. I was responsible for ending a 150-year-old family business, a legacy of good to the nation. And who knows what was going to happen. There was instability. The 4,000 plus employees were like, we felt safe with the Fairfax family. Who knows who's going to own us now? It was a big deal in so many ways. Often the best visions are ones that are personal. And one of the things we've found is for many guests that we've had on Beyond the Crucible, their visions have indeed come out of their worst day, out of their crucible, as it absolutely did for David Chapman. He's not the only one. There's been many. So when you feel like your vision is important, it gives your life meaning. You find almost a blessing in the pain. Nobody wants to go through that kind of a crucible, but we've had a number of guests who've said what I went through was a blessing. Not that they wanted to go through it, but somehow they feel like they've been able to use what they've been through to help others. So obviously they feel they're off the charts passionate, and they feel that it's important. There is a purpose behind it. So there's no question. Often it's linked to your crucible, doesn't have to, but you've got to feel like this is important, this matters.
Yeah. And the fifth point in the blog, I'm going to jump right into it because I think the fourth and fifth points are so closely connected, right? The fourth point being you have to feel it's important. The fifth point being connect your vision to who you fundamentally are. So there's your passion, what you think is important, but then there's also your wiring, your skills, your gifts. So why is that important, right? We've talked about why you have to be passionate about it. Why do you also have to be sort of wired that way to have a vision that feeds your soul in the way that we want it to feed the souls of folks we talk to?
Yeah, it's a good question, Gary. There can be a lot of things we feel need to be done in the world. The question is, are we the one to do it?
Right.
And that's a fundamental question we have to ask. Just because it needs to be done doesn't mean, we're the ones to do it. And so part of how you discern that is, I believe it's got to be connected to your gifts and talents, how you're wired. From my faith perspective, God gives us gifts and talents for a reason. We're meant to use them. That's my philosophical construct. Now, whether you feel it's God or some higher power or some higher purpose, that's up to folks to discern. But, I just feel like it will also greatly increase the chance of success. Okay, you're off the charts passionate about it. It's from deep within your heart. But it's got to be linked to your wiring. So for me, at Beyond the Crucible, I'm fundamentally a reflective advisor. And so we spend our time interviewing other guests on this podcast, having discussions, Gary and I, on different subjects that are on our hearts. So being a reflective advisor and in some small way trying to be a thought leader in different issues, that really, it makes sense because, I'm curious, I'm observant, I love learning, I reflect, I try to listen to all of the things I hear on the podcast and synthesize, discern what are some common traits. So what we do here at Beyond the Crucible is a good fit because it's linked to who I am and how I'm wired. There's a lot of things we could do that I'm not good at. If it was dependent on me selling, if it was dependent on, like building homes for the homeless, I'm not a construction guy,
Right.
I can follow directions. I can build IKEA furniture. I'm not hopeless, but don't ask me to build a deck without any instructions. Even with instructions, it would be tough. So there's many good things that need to be done in the world that I'm not qualified to do. I just don't have that wiring or those gifts. There are others that are better than me, and they should be doing it, not me, because I'll do a better job and help more people. I'll just get in the way. But in terms of what I do here at Beyond the Crucible, it is, from my perspective, a very good fit with my gifts and talents. And so I try to do that which is on my heart and is something that I'm equipped and wired to do and hopefully, ideally do well. At least that's always the goal I strive for.
Right. And we've heard you say it many times, going back to the family media company, you're not a take charge 27 decisions before breakfast kind of guy. Being a corporate executive running this huge institution was not something that you, by your own knowing yourself, that it's not how you're wired. And this is much better wiring for a guy who has called himself scores of times in my hearing a reflective advisor. So what you're doing now certainly fits who Warwick Fairfax is more than what you inherited to do several years ago. The sixth point in the blog, we're just zipping through this, Warwick. This is good stuff, and we're going through it quickly. Remember, listener, what we're talking about is a blog at beyondthecrucible.com, which is called "Think Your Vision Is Too Small. These 7 truths will change your mind." We're on truth number 6. This seems like a big one, and I think one of the reasons that maybe you wrote it. Talk a little bit about that when I ask you the question, but maybe you wrote it because you were ensnared in it with the family media company. But point 6 is free yourself from the sense of obligation. That's critical. Why is that critical?
Yeah, Gary, that's absolutely correct. So I grew up with this tremendous sense of duty and obligation. They talk about in the U.S. military, duty on a country. I've never served in the military, but that sense of duty and obligation, I mean, I'm hardwired in a very major way to feel that way. I mean, it was almost like, I might expire in the process, but I'm going to do my level best to ensure the company is run along the deals with the founder and run well. And whether I wanted to do that or not was irrelevant. It's all about obligation. After Oxford or Harvard Business School, where listeners know I went to, other people might go to recruiting fairs from investment banks and management consulting companies, whatever. I never went to any of those. It was irrelevant. My life was laid out for me. What do you want to do when you grow up? Irrelevant question. I knew what it was. It was a sense of obligation. So one of the things I say is it's not a motivator, it's a demotivator. It's just, I have a very high sense of perseverance, fortunately and unfortunately.
Right.
Every gift has a flat side, unfortunately. It can be used for good or for things that are not so good. That's just one of those fundamental parts of being human.
Preach. And so, that's true.
So unfortunately, it was all about what I should do, what I ought to do. Should and ought aren't particularly good words. So I never could have, I've said this, listeners would know this, I never would have gotten out of the family media business other than the way I did. I never would have sold. I don't think if that had been a scenario. The only way I got out was the company went under. I can't think of another way. Maybe there was some cosmic, God-driven plan there. It's hard to speculate. But now that I'm out of it, I honestly try to say to myself, I want to do what I feel called to. I do not want to live my life based on obligation. I want to live my life based on this is what it's on my heart to do. There's many things that we could do at Beyond the Crucible. Without boring people with all the details, there are some things I choose not to do because I don't want to do them. It's not using my gifts as a reflective advisor. It doesn't mean I couldn't do it well. There are some things I can do actually reasonably well that I don't want to do. For instance, involved in 2 nonprofit organizations, my church, and I used to be on the board of my kids' school. They had finance committees. Well, I have a Harvard MBA and I worked on Wall Street. I understand finance pretty well, but finance bores me. Fortunately, I have people that understand that stuff very well, and which is good. I believe in a team of fellow travelers, but it's not something I may be good at it. I may be very knowledgeable, but I don't enjoy it. So I'm not going to do it. Others can help me with that as needed. So basically, the bottom line here is when you're thinking about your vision, it should not be, gosh, our community, our neighborhood needs X. I don't really feel like I want to do it, but somebody needs to do it, and therefore it needs to be me.
Right.
I would say, as a general rule, I don't want to say never, you never say never. Maybe there are reasons. But as a general, never do something because you feel like you should do it, you ought to do it, you feel obligated. You should do it because you feel called to do it and it's on your heart in line with your gifting. So it should be a calling from deep within, not an obligation. Calling, not obligation, I guess is the way I'd summarize it.
And in your story in particular, and I'm sure in the stories of listeners, you didn't just free yourself from a sense of obligation by going the direction that you went and pursuing the vision that you've pursued. I've heard you talk about it before. You also freed your children and their children, your progeny, are freed from this obligation of that you had. And that's important too. I mean, it affects us when you don't do things out of obligation. It affects us as individuals, but it also affects those who come after us, right?
Yeah, it's a very good point, Gary. Our kids, basically, they don't so much listen to what we say, they watch what we do. So you want to preach to your kids, and we all have a tendency to want to do that. Minimize the words, maximize the actions, maximize the behaviors, because that's what will happen. And so with my kids, I mean, I'm the fifth generation in a family business. My three kids, 2 sons and a daughter, they're the first kids in like 5+ generations to get to do what they want. And needless to say, I have strong convictions about this.
Right.
Why wouldn't I? And I want them to be happy. I want them to be fulfilled. Obviously, from my faith perspective, I want them to have faith, character, but I want them to do what they want to do, and they're all very different. I have a son that's working in marketing and proposal management, a daughter that's in the Mayo Clinic doing child development work, and then a younger son doing, marketing and sales. They're all very different, but they're all in areas where it really links to what they care about and their wiring. And they're not doing it out of an obligation at all. Right. They're doing it because they want to, and it's in line with their gifts, and it's a good fit. So I've tried to help them their whole lives. I mean, I'm an executive coach by training, and, discern what those gifts are, not to tell them what to do, but just help them understand how they're wired. But yeah, they don't, they're all three, they work hard, they've got good work ethic, they're humble, they're model employees, they've got great character, but they're not doing what they're doing because they feel obligated to. They're doing what they're doing because they feel a sense of calling, and it's in line with their gifts, but they're not doing it at all out of a sense of obligation. And that was something I was very passionate about, is I want you to do what you feel called to and what makes you happy, not because of what I or, my wife Gail wants you to do. I just want you to feel called to do it and feel you're happy and that you're good at it. I mean, it's that simple.
Yeah, and I'll be extraordinarily presumptuous and edit Amelia Earhart for this point. Just changing one word in her quote: a single act of calling throws out roots in all directions, and the roots spring up and make new trees. And that's what happened. You followed your calling, and your children are following their calling, which is a beautiful thing. Point 7 in this blog, the final point is motivation is everything. That's true for a lot of things in life. Why is that so true when it comes to crafting a vision and assessing that vision as not even just enough, but not even just sufficient, but as good, as something that's going to make a difference in the lives of others?
Yeah, motivation, it is indeed everything. You want to feel like what you're doing, there's a purpose behind it. We talk about a life of significance as being the touchstone of Beyond the Crucible, a life on purpose dedicated to serving others. You want to feel like what you do matters and will help others. There's some higher purpose, not about us. It's about serving others. And I say, motivation is important because, if you go back, 100+ years ago or more, there were people, the so-called robber barons in this country, who made, Vanderbilt's, Rockefellers, Carnegie's, a lot of folks made enormous sums of money, and railroads and steel mills and what have you. And, without getting into each individual person, in some ways, maybe there was some questionable tactics. And back in the day, the laws weren't what they are now in terms of how they made money. And they came to a point in life where they wanted to give back. And I think it's wonderful to give back. But with some of it, in some cases, well, my reputation was being a pretty ruthless person. So, hey, if I, put my name on a museum and a hospital and set up a big foundation, maybe that will rehabilitate my image a bit. Now, I can't possibly get in the psyche of these folks from the 1800s. I don't know. But I think in some cases, some of that motivation was to rehabilitate that image. If they had a public relations advisor back then, they would have said, hey, invest some money in hospitals or start a foundation because your image is bad, and this will help, recast your image. It would be great advice from a public relations advisor, which probably didn't exist in the 1800s. But if they did, they would have advised that, I strongly believe. So the point is, your motivation should be not because you want your name on a hospital or a museum. Oh, look at so-and-so. They're such wonderful people. That's not wrong. It's all about the motivation. Your motivation should be, I want to help people, and I want to fulfill some higher purpose, some higher calling, not because I want other people to think I'm such a wonderful, enlightened, giving soul, and gosh, look how wonderful they are. That's so not the point. Some people, I'm afraid, maybe do have that perspective. It's all about the motivation should be, I want to serve others, I want to help others, and it shouldn't be about, I want people to think I'm such a wonderful person. That's the wrong motivation. It should be an outward, higher purpose motivation, not I want everybody to think I'm a wonderful person and I want my legacy to be a bit improved because everybody will think I'm wonderful because of my name's on all these hospitals and museums and foundations.
Right. And that's not a good motivation. So very well said. So we've gone through all 7 points. I'm gonna go through them quickly for you, listener. When it comes to crafting and assessing the potential of your vision to bring you a life of significance. First point is it's not a competition. Second point is the key is what is on your heart. Third point is one life changed is enough. Fourth point is link your vision to what you feel is important. Fifth point is connect your vision to who you fundamentally are. 4 and 5 kind of go together. 6 is free yourself from the sense of obligation. 7 is motivation is everything. And I'll end my talking about the 7 points here by reading a quote that I pulled from Muhammad Ali that talks about this 7th point. And that is service to others, right? The motivation. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. That's one of those things I wish I'd have said. That is incredibly good. So we can summarize here, Warwick. How did all these things kind of play out? How did you learn all these things? How did you get past those feelings? But I also understand, a little birdie told me that perhaps 7 points is really 8 points, and that maybe an 8th point came to our prolific writer of this blog. So either wrap us up or take us to the 8th point, and then we'll wrap up after that.
Yeah, so maybe it's 7.5. I mean, it's linked to motivation. One of the things you talk a lot on Beyond the Crucible is identity. So if you have your whole identity in your mission, your cause, as noble as it could be, that can be dangerous. Your identity should never be in your job, even a noble calling. Whether it's providing clean water in Africa, whether it's clean up a park in an inner city neighborhood so the kids can have a safe place to play. Those are all great visions. But your identity should be in, at least from my spiritual framework, in being a child of God, or the fact that I think as humans there is inherent nobility and beauty in that. I think we have the capacity of being worthwhile individuals. So your identity should never be in what you do, and that includes even a noble vision. If you start having your whole sense of self wrapped up in how many numbers you help, how many books you write, how many people that come in a shelter or whatever it is, nothing wrong with wanting to help a lot of people, but your identity can't be in numbers or in the vision and calling itself, because once you do that, you're on a stepping stone to turn something for good into something that can be actually hurt people. Your ego will begin to get in the way. You will let go of good people because they're getting more credit than you are. and you go down a slippery slope where you can turn something good into something that's not good. You can see that beautiful silver trophy begins to get tarnished.
Right. Yep.
So it's linked to motivation as everything, but if you start feeling like your identity is getting all wrapped up in your cause, your vision, that is dangerous. Again, fellow travelers can be helpful, and hopefully there's some brave enough to say, hey, Warwick, Gary, I'm seeing some tarnish coming on that silver trophy. I'm seeing some ego get in the way. That's where we need people to help us. So identity, it's sort of like a 7.5 point. It is linked to motivation, but you never want your identity getting completely wrapped up in what you do.
Yep. And that, listener, is why it's important. Even when we talk about a blog that appears at beyondthecrucible.com, it's important to listen to the podcast, because bonus content will show up at any time when one of us is inspired to add some bonus content. So one of the things that happens all the time on the podcast when we have guests is you'll ask them a final question. You'll ask them to sort of wrap up, right, put a bow on the package that was the episode. I'll do that with you here. How would you sum up this whole conversation? What do you hope listeners take away from this discussion we've just had?
I want them to think that their vision is not a small vision. A vision that helps one person, a vision that's linked to what they fundamentally feel called to, maybe from a faith perspective by God or whatever their spiritual framework is, but a vision that's linked to some higher purpose, that's linked to what they're off the charts passionate about, that's linked to their beliefs and values, and is in line with their wiring. And they feel like what it is important. It's not about them. It's not about their identity. It's not about making them feel good. It's about serving others. That's not a small vision. A vision that you're passionate about, that you feel called to, it can't be a small vision to the degree that you believe that there's some divine force in the world or the cosmos, or however you look at it. If you feel called to something, it's not a small vision. It's the right vision. It's from my perspective, your God-given calling, your God-given purpose and mission and vision in life. That's not a small vision. It can't be. If there's a creator up there, then it's not a small vision. It's part of maybe some grand redemptive plan in some sense. So a vision isn't small. If you feel called to it, it's in line with your wiring, and you feel like this is important. It's not about me, it's about others. That cannot and is not a small vision.
And to help you folks come to that conclusion that Warwick just said he hoped you get to, as we do with every episode of the show that is based on a blog, and as we do in every blog, as a matter of fact, we have some reflection questions at the end, and I'm going to run these past you to ponder based on what you've just heard for the last 55 minutes or so. First one is, why does your vision matter? Write down who your vision serves and why you feel called to lead and live out that vision. That's the first reflection question. Second one is, how does your vision use everything you are and everything you have experienced to serve others? Take some notes on that. Write that down. Don't just sort of think about it and move on. Keep it somewhere so as more things come to you, chances are they're not all going to fly into your brain at one time. On a piece of paper, keep those things, and as more things come to you, write them down, because that will be fodder to keep you moving forward and to help you understand just how important that vision is, how not small in the grand scheme of things that vision is. And then the third point of reflection is, who do you know, friends, family, colleagues, who can help you stay true to your vision, your purpose, and avoid being tempted to think that it is not enough? Dare I say, those folks are, as we say all the time here at Beyond the Crucible, your fellow travelers. So until the next time that we're together, listeners, thank you for the time that you spent with us here. Thank you for the time you spend with us every week if you're a frequent listener. And please do understand, we know your Crucible experiences aren't easy. Warwick's wasn't easy. He talks about it quite a bit. Mine wasn't easy. I talk about it less, but it was not easy. But they weren't the end of our stories. And your Crucible doesn't have to be the end of your story either. In fact, if you learn the lessons of it, of your crucible or crucibles, if you learn those lessons and you apply them to your life, the next chapter can be the most rewarding chapter of all in your life, because that chapter is what we talk about all the time here, and that's a life of significance. If you enjoyed this episode, learned something from it, we invite you to engage more deeply with those of us at Beyond the Crucible. Visit our website, beyondthecrucible.com, to explore a plethora of offerings to help you transform what's been broken into breakthrough. A great place to start? Our free online assessment, which will help you pinpoint where you are on your journey beyond your crucible and to chart a course forward. See you next week.